Ladies and gentlemen, Jacob Licklider and Doctor Who is back today. Yes, we have a two-episode premiere of season one. They renumbered the seasons to begin a new era under the helm of Russell T Davies, which is, one of those interesting little tidbits, uh, obviously happening because, well, they want to get new eyes on the show, and trying to have someone watch 13 seasons of a television show is actually a hard marketing sell. But we have two episodes, both written by Russell T Davies. We have Space Babies and The Devil's Chord. This video, of course, is going to be largely my reactions to both of those episodes. Now, I am actually recording this into segments. I have just finished watching Space Babies. Uh, Gonna watch The Devil's Chord as soon as I'm done recording this bit, and then I will go into that. But there will be spoilers. I'm keeping it all in one video because it's a two-episode premiere, and if you're gonna watch one, you're gonna want to watch the other. I will say before getting directly into the episode, I am, Disney Plus is actually now uh, putting the church on Ruby Road as episode one. And with Space Babies, you can really tell that Russell T Davies originally was hoping to probably get this out sooner. Space Babies takes place right at literally the opening shot is the final sequence of the church on Ruby Road. After some actually really nice updates to the credit sequence, I think I don't know, they took the time, went back and fixed a couple of things which was really, really nice to see. But Space Babies an episode is decent. It's a decent start, is probably the best thing that I have to say about it. There are things I like, there's a lot that I didn't, things that work, things that don't. Um, this is the first episode of two in the series, directed by the entire series is directed by new directors to Doctor Who. This first one is directed by Julie Ann Robinson. And I actually quite like her directorial style. This episode is kind of going it's kind of going back and forth between some horror elements and some very whimsical elements. The premise is there is a space station around a planet, Pacific del Rio, that has space babies. Quite literally. It's in the title. And I'm gonna say that this is one of those premises that you're probably either going to love or you're going to hate. I particularly I'm not the biggest fan of the space babies as presented, but I do like a lot of the sci-fi concepts that Davies is playing with. I think the actual big problem with the babies themselves is the effects work. Uh, the babies are dubbed by, actual actors, and their lips are trying to move to match. And sometimes it looks really good, sometimes it really doesn't. It's this really back and forth. Now, of course, Doctor Who has always had cheesy effects, but honestly, a premise like this is a bit odd. Now, I will say, thematically, we are fitting very nicely in Russell T Davies sort of making this statement of both the Doctor and Ruby as characters as finding this sense of community through both being adopted. Um, a large part of this episode actually has that undercurrent through it. These babies are abandoned in the space, have been abandoned for 6 years. There is only one other adult on board, hiding from them honestly some genuinely heartfelt moments of really not wanting to see these babies die because she's not a scientist. She's just tried everything she could. There's some commentary here on refugees that I think is interesting. I'm not sure if it entirely works and doesn't get entirely the focus, but a lot of this is, again, there's a lot of like little bits of commentary here and there in this episode in particular. There's a moment where one of the babies actually asks, after finding out that their growth was stunted, um, asks, "Did we grow up wrong?" And the doctor responds something along the lines of, "No, you didn't." That actually, I don't know, that line in particular resonated with me for some personal reasons that I'm not going to get into. But it's interesting. There are nice little bits in there. I do think the actual commentary of the episode is a little unfocused. And I think that might be some of my biggest issue is that there is some lack of focus. A lot of this episode is not so much speed running, but trying to get through a lot of beats that usually, if that would be played out throughout a couple of episodes in a series. Again, the series is only going to have 8 episodes, and I'm a little worried after this first episode that because of that, there's going to be too much of this speed running idea of running through the um, running through the character beats and the ideas. Specifically in terms of Ruby, while I don't want to entirely come back to Russell Davies' first run as showrunner, um, Davies is using what he learned there on how to establish a character and essentially speed running a lot of the series one Rose arc, if that makes sense. Not so much in making Ruby a copycat of Rose, but making a companion, getting very early on the premise of the show, the Doctor's status in the universe as the last of his kind, and giving Ruby a TARDIS key, all done in one episode. So much so that we actually speed run, and Davies outright says he's not doing another Father's Day of Ruby's going to try to go back to meet her mother on the day she was dropped off at the church, which I think was actually a good decision. It also allows to make a statement that no, Ruby is going to see her mother, regardless her mother. That's the important part. It is actually that's one of the final scenes of the episode with the Doctor and Ruby are particularly good. And of course, Judy Gatwa and Millie Gibson are carrying this thing on their back. I'm going to be honest because again, the babies are a bit weak. Um, it's very much a time of we're trying to have um, we're trying to basically a lot of this has to be carried two by the two adults. Again, the Jocelyn Sinclair, played by Golda Roosevelt, is our other human actress, our adult human actress, and or at least in the bulk of the story. Obviously, there's some appearances um, by Michelle Greenridge and Angela Winter in the end, but I think it's very much carried by three people, and the babies don't quite work. Now, yeah, I like the idea of the baby farm, and I like the idea of it being abandoned. I also like, in theory, the idea of the Bogeyman, our villain of the episode, of this is essentially we're doing a bait and switch early on, basically. The entire episode twist hangs on that the Bogeyman isn't evil. It was just created by an AI to fulfill sort of the story needs of children. It reminded me a lot of Hyde from Series 7, and it executed about the same way. And that and Bogeyman is literally a pun. It is made out of snot, which is it's a bit of gross out. I'm gonna be honest, as an idea, it's going to be one of those ideas that you're either going to love or hate. Um, but I'm not entirely sure where I fall. I like the idea of a threat. The design is quite cool and it's shot very quickly, so you're always just getting flashes. Some of the episode is actually quite frenetic with its directing and editing, so you're only getting flashes. Um, uh, but it's one of those ideas that is interesting. Uh, Davies is also teasing the series arc here. There is a scene where a flashback becomes manifest, flashback to the church, where something about the church scene from the church on Ruby Road changes, and Ruby's presumably mother points at the doctor. That's setting up some arc stuff. Obviously, I don't know what the arc is. It does feel like Davies is actively playing with time. We have a scene early on going back to prehistoric Earth very briefly, where Ruby literally steps on a butterfly, changes butterfly effect changes history. She becomes an alien briefly, and the Doctor has to resuscitate a butterfly to bring her back to normal. That's sort of the idea we're going for now. I do think because of the reduced runtime, we are actually going to have a more concentrated arc that isn't that is probably going to pop up in every episode somehow. And I mean more explicit. And I think that might actually be a better thing for Doctor Who as a whole, largely because, again, the typical Doctor Who arc, even with all three showrunners of the revival in the past, had the tendency to make it just arc words. Um, the most that outside of that was obviously Flux being a 6 episode serial essentially, even though I've got my big issues with Flux. And then of course series 10 with Missy's character development. And I think if Davies is following those examples, we might actually be in for something great here. Honestly, the trouble with Space Babies for me is that it was fine. I had fun with it, but I'm going to be honest, it wasn't particularly great. It wasn't a smash hit. It wasn't Wild Blue Yonder, again, which I mean, not every episode can be. I don't know if this. It feels like the Church on Ruby Road was meant to be the opener, and this was meant to be in episode two. Oh, there are a lot of parallels to the end of the world here. Uh, Largely good and interesting. Um, I'm kind of trying to feel out where we're going. Obviously, we have another episode to talk about, and I don't usually give scores for these sorts of reactions. I'm probably honestly hovering at about a 6 out of 10. A lot of that coming down to just the fact that Shooty Gatwa and Billy Gibson, once again, are amazing to watch. But after a brief transition, we will start talking about The Devil's Chord. And now I have just finished The Devil's Chord. Once again, written by Russell T Davies, as 6 of the episodes this series are. But this one is directed by Ben Chessel, and this one's just the stronger of the 2 episodes that premiered today. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I really enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. It was very camp and over the top in ways I don't think Russell had done with Doctor Who before. Um, does make for some uneven viewing after Space Babies. Uh, but I really enjoyed it. Now, the show stealer of this one is Jinx Monsoon. I don't know Jinx Monsoon. I don't follow Drag Race at all, but her entire performance is over the top. It knows exactly what it wants to be. It knows what it's doing. Choices are being made, and those choices are utter madness. We are continuing the line of villainous godlike entities. Davies finally playing into the Doctor not being the highest power in the universe like he did in the Giggle, which is one of the things that I think was really strong about the Giggle. I think actually the Devil's Court is stronger, partially because Maestro as a character is, while the Toymaker and the Giggle was very much a collaboration between the original idea of the Toymaker and then just Neil Patrick Harris and Davies, this is fully Davies being let loose on this idea. I love the idea of the embodiment of music and the implications that a lack of music would have for the world. It's a bit melodramatic, but of course it is. That's what music is. And of course, we're wrapping this up in the historical setting of 1963, um, largely with largely with the Beatles recording their first album. Now, there's no Beatle music. There's no music of the Beatles in this episode. That is, well, it's not been explicitly said. Licensing music from the Beatles is ungodly expensive, and while the show has clearly have had a budget increase in this new era, I still have a feeling that would take a significant portion of the episode's budget. But that doesn't mean there isn't music. Murray Gold does some original scoring here, but a decent chunk of the score is actually either licensed or classical pieces, and I think that's really, really good. It helps get the vibe across, and it allows Gold to end up writing his own big swinging 60s um, pop sensation number right at the end after the climax that we end. Yeah, this episode ends on a giant musical number, which is almost too happy, but my God, like the fun energy is infectious. Like it's just really really fun. Um, I'm kind of going all over the place because there's a lot to talk about. Um, Specifically, again, the idea. There's also this moment in the middle where to get away from Maestro Evelyn. The Doctor takes away sound, and we have the sequence done all visually in silence. Ben Chesil, the director, massive props to him. Um, I don't know. There seems to be this very distinct style in terms of visually. Uh, this looks more distinct than Space Babies did. It has its own look. It also very much. Once again, we're still setting up a lot of the ideas of a season arc. We have a name drop at the end of The One Who Waits. We have this idea that Ruby is not all she seems to be. Now, that's the one thing that I'm like, I could do without. I just would love normal companions, please. But also, I feel like Davies might actually do something interesting there. Again, the Carol of the Bells gets played um, during this sequence where Ruby's been captured by Maestro, and it's harkening back to who she is, and I'm a little I'm a little worried that we're gonna go with something basically that the mystery box is going to be open and being ultimately disappointing as it often can be. Um, but um, other than that, this one is so much fun. I love the premise of music being taken away. The 1963 setting has some interesting drops of the Doctor reflecting on his past, not knowing where Susan is. Uh, Susan could be anywhere. She just isn't. Well, okay, in the context of the episode. She's off in Shoreditch, school with Ian and Barbara. A couple like 4 or 5 months before an unearthly child is going to happen. Um, but yeah, it's again, I love the idea of the Doctor being open about his being a father and a grandfather, as well as not knowing where Susan is. It's a great idea. I hope it kind of gets explored. I feel like Davies might be setting up a return for Susan, like actually in the future, which would be lovely to see Caroline Ford on screen again. Um, and again, a lot of this episode both works at being a standalone plot and well as building more towards an arc. It's definite that this series, each episode is going to have to build towards some sort of an arc. Um, we don't quite know what it is yet. Uh, if I had to guess, it's going to involve Ruby. It's going to involve the one who waits, obviously, and it seems that we're just building out bigger threats and making the universe at a massive scale. This could be a double-edged sword of Davies' one continual one-upping of himself, but I also feel like in this one, Davies kind of made the threat of Maestro feel right. He pulled a trick out of Pyramids of Mars, obviously, and we had this great surreal interlude in the middle. And of course, Jinx Monsoon is giving such a camp performance that it is over the top. I feel like some people aren't going to like it, but I think they need to understand what Monsoon is doing because Monsoon is making very deliberate choices and makes the threat worth it. Um, and it's one of those fascinating concepts for a character. I also love the idea of the Devil's Chord. Quite literally, a tritone brings this character into the universe. Again, dealing with the fallout from the giggle. These, the universe is in some way breaking down and allowing other things to get in. And I think that's just, it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting concept. Um, uh, but it's over the top. It's crazy. Godwin and Gibson are also just have the chemistry down immediately. They're giving great performances. I think Ruby Sunday as a character might need a little more depth, especially after these two episodes being just a little. We don't. She's had 3 episodes, and we have her basic character, but we don't have as much focus entirely on who she is in a lot of ways. But that's mostly fine. She has a character and she has a motivation, and she clearly enjoys the traveling. She's traveling for the enjoyment of it. Um, we haven't just quite given her a full arc yet. And of course, I imagine that arc is coming, especially with what's coming up next for the show. Things are continually moving forward. Um, Honestly, if I gave this Space Babies a 6 out of 10, The Devil's Chord would probably be an 8 out of 10. I know we ended up talking more about Space Babies in terms of time, but The Devil's Chord is just it's fun, it's bold, it's brash. I really enjoyed it. Uh, I could see myself watching that again, that becoming like perfect episode, one of those you revisit because it's fun, it's over the top, the literal representations of notes and the music and the resolution, the way the Beatles tied into the resolution, while a bit cheesy, was it worked. Yeah, it also meant we finally got a major chord resolution because the score of this episode often would leave its underscoring unresolved, um, which was, you know, clearly deliberate choice. Uh, Oddly enough, I think Mermaid Gold is doing quite well for the score. I'm still apprehensive, and I still kind of wish we would get a new composer again because I think Drew is the sound of Doctor Who should always be evolving, um, in terms of composition. But I think it is. I think it is, a really, really good episode, and I'm glad Doctor Who's back. I'm excited to be making these videos. I'm excited to be doing this week by week. Of course, my opinion is not the only one that exists. So let me know what you thought of this pair of episodes. Down in the comments, please leave a like. If you like what I do, follow me on social media, as well as follow Blood Donut Studios on YouTube, where I have a comics podcast with my good friend Joey Morgan, and of course my blog. And I guess I'll see you guys next week with the return of Stephen Moffat to Doctor Who in Boom.